When you think of the Caribbean, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? I bet a lot of you instantly picture swashbuckling pirates, buried treasure, and epic naval battles. And guess what? A huge chunk of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies was actually filmed right here on these very islands. But here's the twist. This place is so much more than just Johnny Depp and Hollywood magic. Today, I'm taking you beyond the movie sets to uncover the real Caribbean, where the water is bluer, the vibes are wilder, and the stories are even crazier than anything you've seen on screen. Stretching across more than 7,000 islands and islets, the Caribbean is a world of its own. A place where rhythms, flavors, languages, and traditions have blended together for centuries. St. Lucia doesn't ease you in. The Pitons rise straight out of the Caribbean Sea, two volcanic spires standing side by side like the island's own gatekeepers. Petit Piton reaches 2,438 feet, Gros Piton a little higher at 2,619, and together they're still cooling remnants of old volcanic plugs, joined by a single ridge between them. Below them sits Soufrière, founded by the French in 1746 and still the oldest town on the island. Its streets are lined with small roadside eateries, the kind of unassuming places where the best meals on this island are actually made. Fishing boats rest along the shore, wood frame buildings lean toward the water, and the town carries its age quietly. Further north, the coastline folds inward at Marigot Bay, a narrow inlet closed in on three sides by steep green hills. Sailors once called it a hurricane hole, safe enough that yachts still gather here when the rest of the sea turns rough. One writer called it the most beautiful bay in the Caribbean, and from above, it's hard to argue. Out past the bay, a tall ship glides beneath the pitons at golden hour, its sails catching the last light of the day. Elsewhere, the coast turns to cliffs and coves, cut sharp against water that shifts from navy to turquoise within a few hundred feet. This is an island that keeps changing its shape, mountain to harbor to reef, without ever losing what makes it recognizable. Before we head to the next spot, here's a fun question. The largest carnival festival in the Caribbean, famous in Trinidad and Tobago, is called Comment your answer. In the Exumas, no two Ks look quite the same. 365 islands and cays curl through this stretch of the Atlantic, almost one for every day of the year. Great Exuma anchors the chain, running nearly 37 miles and linked to Little Exuma by a single small bridge. The water never seems to hold one color for long. It shifts from deep sapphire to pale turquoise wherever a sandbar rises just beneath the surface. Astronaut Scott Kelly once looked down from orbit and called these waters the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. Along the eastern shorelines, centuries of tide have carved the limestone into hollows and blowholes that still catch the swell. Nearly 130,000 acres of this water and coastline sit inside protected parkland, kept as close to untouched as anywhere in the Bahamas. You'll want to be up early here. The outdoors doesn't wait, and Exuma rewards the people who don't sleep in. From fishing and sailing to snorkeling and windsurfing, there's almost too much to fit into one visit. It's earned the nickname Regatta Capital of the Bahamas, known for the traditional wooden sloops that still race here each year. Farther south, the Tropic of Cancer cuts straight through Little Exuma, the official edge of the tropics, marked by nothing more than a line on a map. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing destinations and unforgettable journeys. Aruba might be the easiest island in the Caribbean to see on your own terms. Rent a car, and almost every beach is a short drive away. That's not just a convenience, it's part of the experience. Each stretch of coast here looks and feels different from the last. Along the west side, the sand runs pale and soft for miles, backed by high-rise resorts and rows of thatched umbrellas. Some beaches are shaded by palms and lined with sailboats resting just offshore. Others are wide open, just sand, sky, and a few colored beach chairs facing the water. Up at Hedikurari, near the island's northwest tip, the trade winds barely let up, which is why it hosts the Aruba High Winds, the Caribbean's largest windsurfing competition. A short boat ride from the capital sits Renaissance Island, a 40-acre private stretch of sand known for the flamingos that make their home along its shore. Inland, the landscape turns dry and rugged fast, sun-baked cliffs dropping straight into turquoise coves. Watching over the northwest coast is the California Lighthouse, built between 1914 and 1916 and named for a steamship that wrecked on these rocks in 1891. At nearly 100 feet tall, it's still the tallest structure on the island. Closer to Oranjestad, the coast turns into a working harbor, with cruise ships tied up beside a marina full of yachts. The capital itself is built in Dutch colonial style, stepped gables, pastel pink and yellow facades, a slice of Amsterdam set against coral reef and open water. We worked really hard to make these videos, and of course, your support is a huge motivation. If you love us, you can scan the QR code here to buy us a cup of coffee. From above, Turks and Caicos looks less like land and more like a study in blue, pale near the shore, deepening in bands toward the horizon, until the color itself becomes the landmark. The territory is really two island groups, the Turks and the Caicos, split by a channel that drops to 7,000 feet, a trench hidden just beneath all that calm surface. Around both groups runs a barrier reef stretching 340 miles, the third largest in the world. It's why the water inside stays so still. The reef absorbs the ocean's force out at sea, long before it ever reaches the sand. Providenciales carries most of that shelter, and most of the people who call these islands home. Along its coast, Grace Bay curves on and on, resorts and villas lined up against sand the color of bone, the shoreline barely changing shape for miles at a time. Inland, the character shifts completely. Quiet mangrove flats and shallow lagoons that barely announce themselves from above, half water, half green. Some of that wetland is protected under international treaty, too fragile to disturb. Elsewhere, the land thins into narrow sand spits, cut apart by channels where boats leave white trails behind, briefly rewriting the water's surface before it settles again. South of the Caicos Islands, a shallow underwater plateau called the Caicos Bank spreads for about 1,700 square miles, more sea than land, more light than depth. Small rocky cays break the flatness here and there, worn smooth by centuries of tide. By evening, the same water that burned electric blue at noon settles into something pale and still, waiting for the light to come back. I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching from? And which country are you joining me from today? Most people picture Jamaica as one postcard, white sand, blue water, but from above, the island turns out to have a lot more layers than that. Thatched roof huts and palm groves ring calm coves where the water fades from pale green to deep turquoise. Inland, the hills grow something the whole world tastes without knowing it. Pimento berries, the source of allspice, and Jamaica still supplies about 70% of the global trade. Along the north coast, breakwaters and palm-covered islets shelter resort shorelines from the open sea. Just past the beach, some coves turn glassy and still, ringed by forest and waterfront homes. Near Port Antonio, a lagoon like this drops close to 180 feet, fed by cold freshwater springs beneath a warm sea. Locals once believed it had no bottom at all. Small peninsulas jut into the bays, dotted with docks, boats, and homes tucked among the palms. Farther along, white sand stretches for miles, broken only by the shadows of leaning palms. Cliffside lookouts show the reef just beneath the surface, a pale ring of blue against the deep sea. On the coastal roads below, a tap on the horn does most of the talking. A couple of beeps can mean hello, thank you, or simply, let me pass. Inland, mangroves and pink-tinted sand line quiet coves where storm clouds gather over the hills. Higher still, the Blue Mountains climb to 7,400 feet, the island's longest range and home to some of the priciest coffee on Earth. Puerto Rico's edges are wild before they're anything else, dune grass and green scrub rolling straight into open Atlantic water. Old stone walls sit half-swallowed by vines here, roofless, quiet, waiting for no one in particular. Not far away, another lighthouse still stands watch, restored, its shutters painted green against the white. Cliffs cut into the coast next, dark volcanic rock taking the full force of turquoise waves. Inland, the trees close in. This is El Yunque, the only tropical rainforest in the entire U.S. National Forest System, nearly 28,000 acres of it. Water finds its way down through the canopy in falls that never really stop running. Climb higher and the forest opens onto ridgelines, the whole island laid out toward a hazy coastal plain. Offshore, a single forested island sits alone in deep blue water, untouched, no bridge, no roads. Back on the mainland, old San Juan stacks color on top of color, pink, blue, yellow rooftops packed into narrow colonial streets. Guarding the bay beside it, Castillo San Felipe del Morro has stood since construction began in 1539, its walls built to stop ships, not people. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983, El Morro still faces the same water it was built to defend 5 centuries later. Down at the water's edge, marinas and resort pools now sit where cannons once faced the sea. Barbados doesn't ease you in. It hits you with color first, then history. Carlisle Bay has been this island's front door since 1628, a natural harbor that's watched centuries of ships come and go. Around it, Bridgetown grew up crooked on purpose. Narrow, serpentine streets laid out the old English way, not the grid pattern most colonial towns followed. It's rare enough that UNESCO named the whole historic town and garrison a World Heritage Site back in 2011. At its center stands the Parliament buildings, coral limestone pulled straight from the island. The clock inside is older than the tower around it in spirit, built in 1875, still keeping the same time it always has. Barbados's parliament itself traces back to 1639, one of the oldest in the whole Commonwealth. Head inland, and the story changes completely. Sugarcane once needed wind to survive, and at one point, this island packed in at least 3 windmills per square mile. Only one still stands whole, Morgan Lewis, built in 1727, silent for decades, until restorers got its sails turning again by 1999. Along the coast, cliffs drop straight into water so clear it barely looks real, the kind that turns a quiet cove into a postcard without trying. And everywhere in between, the pride of Barbados blooms, its red and orange flowers so loved they made it onto the country's coat of arms. Romance and adventure are practically a given in Barbados. The island just hands them to you, one turquoise inlet at a time. Curaçao doesn't do subtle color, it does contrast. From above, Willemstad unfolds along the curve of Sint Anna Bay, in long rows of pink, blue, and ochre facades, their orange-tiled roofs catching the afternoon light and holding it. This is Punda, the old town, and directly across the channel sits Otro Banda, the other side, together forming 2 halves of one UNESCO World Heritage City. Between them floats the Queen Emma Bridge, nicknamed the Swinging Old Lady, a 548-foot pontoon walkway resting on 16 floating pontoons that has linked the 2 districts since 1888. It still swings open on command today, hinging aside on its own pontoons so that ocean-going ships can pass through into the harbor beyond. Higher up, the Queen Juliana Bridge arcs 185 feet above the same channel, tall enough for the largest freighters to slide beneath, the tallest bridge in the Caribbean. At night, the waterfront changes register completely, its candy colors deepening into long reflections that ripple slowly across the bay. West of the city, the coastline softens into turquoise shallows and pale sand, the offshore reef breaking the water into ribbons of blue. Inland, the coast gives way to a drier, rougher Curaçao, dry scrubland and red dirt trails climbing toward Christoffelberg, the island's highest point, at 372 meters. Out past the reefs, about 10 kilometers southeast, the island simply empties out. Klein Curaçao is flat, uninhabited, and coral pink at its center. Its lighthouse has stood watch since 1850, rebuilt after a hurricane tore the original down in 1877. Two shades of the same island, one meticulously painted and endlessly maintained, the other left alone, standing quietly against the wind. Dominica is barely 300 square miles, yet it packs more vertical drama into that space than almost anywhere else in the Caribbean. Every road here bends before it commits, clinging to a cliff edge, curling around a bay, refusing to run straight because the land itself never does. Waves break against black volcanic rock, right up against palm-lined paths that lead nowhere in a hurry. This is the Nature Island, a name earned by rainforest that spills almost straight down to the shoreline. At the southwestern tip, Scott's Head marks the broken rim of an old submarine caldera, the sea now filling what a volcano once hollowed out. Nearby, Champagne Reef gets its name from bubbles rising off the ocean floor, volcanic gas escaping through water that's warm before you even reach it. Five volcanoes shape this island, more than any other in the Caribbean, and the ground still remembers every one of them. Roseau, the capital, sits low against the water on the southwest coast, its harbor the one flat surface for miles in any direction. Inland, the island climbs again toward Morne Diablotins, 4,747 feet up, the highest point on an island only 47 kilometers long. Deep in Morne Trois Pitons National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1997, water finds its way out of the mountain twice over. Trafalgar Falls drops in too, Papa Falls, thundering down nearly 125 feet, and Mama Falls beside it, smaller, softer, in no rush to catch up. Small island, 5 volcanoes, countless rivers cutting fresh paths to the sea. Dominica never really stops moving, it just changes shape as it goes. If you've visited this place before, comment 1. If you haven't, comment 2. Grand Cayman is a small island with an outsized reputation for one thing: water that barely seems real. There are no rivers here, the limestone underneath is too porous to hold one, so nothing muddies the sea on its way out. That absence is what makes the color possible, layers of turquoise shifting with every meter of depth. Along the shore, the same limestone turns to rock, jagged in places, worn smooth in others by centuries of tide. Offshore, coral reefs wrap around all three islands, quietly building the structures the rest of the ecosystem depends on. Just past the reef, the seafloor drops away. The Cayman Trench falls more than 4 miles down, one of the deepest points in the Caribbean. On the west coast, that same water calms into 7 Mile Beach, a crescent of pale coral sand that, despite its name, runs closer to 5.5 miles. Georgetown, the capital, sits just to the south of it. West Bay stretches out to the north. Farther along the coast, small cays and mangrove channels break the shoreline apart, threading green through the blue. Even from above, the reef never fully disappears. It just goes soft, a shadow drifting beneath the surface. Grand Cayman itself is really just the tip of something larger, the surfacing peak of an underwater mountain range. Sand, limestone, reef, under different light, it's all the same rock, just wearing different disguises. This information was compiled from multiple sources. If there are any inaccuracies, please share your suggestions in the comments below. The British Virgin Islands scatter across the sea like a puzzle that never quite got put back together. Around 60 islands and cays in all, only 16 of them inhabited. Steep green hills roll straight down into the water here, the visible tops of a mountain range that drowned long ago and left only its summits standing. On Tortola, the tallest of those summits, Mount Sage, climbs to 521 meters, the high point of the entire territory. Down at sea level, harbor towns spill color down the hillsides, pink and blue and yellow roofs stacked above the water where the boats come in. Road Town, tucked into one of those harbors, is where most visitors first arrive by yacht. Not every island here looks the same. Some carry entire hillsides of villas and gardens. Others are barely more than a ring of sand and palms holding a reef in place. Between the larger islands runs the Sir Francis Drake Channel, calm enough that sailors can navigate by sight alone, one island always in view of the next. It's part of why this place has long carried the nickname Sailing Capital of the World. Look closer at the shallows and the color explains itself, pale turquoise over sand, deepening to blue wherever the reef drops away. Underwater, that same reef keeps working quietly, a maze most visitors only ever see from above. One island out here breaks the pattern completely, flat, built from coral and limestone instead of old volcanic rock, guarded by a barrier reef stretching some 18 miles. There are no rivers anywhere in the territory. Every shade of blue below comes from the sea itself. Antigua doesn't announce itself with one big landmark. It's made of edges, coves, points, and bays repeating themselves around the coastline. Officially, there are 365 of them, one beach for every day of the year, and the count somehow still feels conservative. The hills roll down green and dry in the same breath, thinning to scrub before they meet the water. On the southeast coast, English Harbor cuts in deep enough to be one of the largest protected anchorages in the eastern Caribbean, a hurricane hideout for centuries before it became a hideout for pleasure boats. Its neighbor, Falmouth, fills the same role today, docks packed with masts every spring during Antigua sailing week. Inland, an old stone sugar mill still stands with its sails intact, a leftover from the 1670s, when Antigua's economy turned almost entirely to cane. That shift built the island and broke the people forced to work it, a history the ruins don't try to hide. Offshore, a single weathered rock sits alone in the shallows, sculpted by nothing but water and time. Mangrove channels thread through the coast's quieter side, water gone still and green under the trees. On the northwest shore, St. John's Harbor runs deep enough for cruise ships, and the town behind it still wears its colonial storefronts in faded pastel. The Spanish called it Antigua, ancient, but its first people called it Waladli, simply our own. Whichever name you use, the island keeps circling back to the same thing: water on every side, and no two stretches of it quite the same. Grenada is a small island built entirely by fire, 21 miles of volcanic ridge rising out of the eastern Caribbean, still shaped like the crater that formed it. From above, the interior folds into deep green valleys, cut by the same slopes that erupted more than 1 million years ago. The coastline never stays one thing for long. Sheer cliffs give way to sheltered coves, and the rock breaks into stacks and blowholes where the sea has been working the volcanic stone for centuries. Then the light changes, and the whole west coast turns gold as the sun drops behind the water. Grand Anse Beach curves along the southwest shore for nearly 2 miles, its pale sand facing directly into that sunset. Further along, the coastline folds into a horseshoe, the natural harbor that gave St. George's its reason to exist. Locals call it the carronage, an old word for hauling a ship onto its side to scrape the hull clean. Pastel buildings climb the hillside straight up from the water, packed in tight around the curve of the bay. Above it all, Fort George still holds its position on the headland, built in the 1700s when the French and British were fighting over this same harbor. Inland and up, the elevation changes everything. Cloud gathers over rainforest that covers Grenada's central mountains. Somewhere in that canopy, a waterfall cuts through red volcanic rock before dropping into a pool below. The whole island still reads like a volcano that hasn't finished cooling, every coastline, every hill, shaped by the same eruption. The bay opens up first, Fort de France, spread wide across the hills, its rooftops catching the light, while the water below does most of the talking. At the mouth of it sits Fort St. Louis, a stone spur pushed nearly 300 meters into the sea, standing guard over the harbor since construction began there in 1638. Centuries later, it's still an active naval base, one of the best preserved fortresses anywhere in the Caribbean, its walls worn smooth by salt air and time. Further south, sailboats and catamarans sit at anchor in quiet coves, the water shifting from deep navy to glass-clear turquoise, depending on where the sun hits it. Green islets rise out of that same water like they were dropped there on purpose, each one ringed by forest that never quite stops climbing toward the hills behind it. Nearly 40% of Martinique is still covered in that same green, unbroken from coastline to summit. Further north, the coastline changes character entirely, black sand instead of white, a small fishing village pressed in tight against volcanic cliffs. That color in the sand comes from Mount Pelée, looming inland at almost 1,400 meters, the highest point on the whole island. In 1902, it erupted with enough force to bury the old capital, Saint-Pierre, in a matter of minutes. Further inland, a waterfall drops through the same rainforest that once caught the volcano's ash and, over a century, grew back around it. Out past the reefs, the sea deepens into an uninterrupted blue, dolphins slipping just beneath the surface as if the water barely noticed them. Fire built this island a long time ago, and the water's been quietly softening its edges ever since. Fly high enough over Guadeloupe, and the outline stops making sense as a single island. It splits into two distinct wings, joined only by a thin channel of salt water. To the west, Basse-Terre rises volcanic and green. To the east, Grande-Terre lies flat, worn down by the sea into pale limestone. Nowhere is that limestone more dramatic than the eastern tip at Pointe de Château, where centuries of waves have carved the cliffs into shapes that look like the ruins of a castle that was never actually there. A 9-ton cross has stood on that headland since 1951, watching where the Atlantic meets the Caribbean. Nearly 500,000 people climb up to it every year, more than to any other site in Guadeloupe. Sail south and the coastline softens, the Bay of the Santés, ringed by green hills, small boats riding quietly at anchor. It's often called one of the most beautiful bays in the world, and Fort Napoleon watches over all of it from the hill above. Built across more than 20 years in the 1800s in the old Vauban style, the fort never fired a shot in battle. It spent its history as a penitentiary instead. Closer to shore, past white sand and coconut palms, a red and white lighthouse rises out of its own islet, guiding boats home since the late 1920s. Inland, the harbor at Pointe Pitre, called La Darse, has taken in ships since the 1700s, its old covered market still standing at the edge of the same quay. Two coastlines, one hidden channel between them. Guadeloupe keeps changing shape depending on where you're standing. Roatán doesn't announce itself with mountains or drama. It rises quietly out of the Caribbean, a long green ridge less than 5 miles wide at its broadest point, stretched thin between sea and sky. The island is the largest of Honduras's Bay Islands, sitting between Utila and Guanaja in the Western Caribbean. What looks like ordinary hillside forest from above is actually standing on something older than the island itself. Roatán is built on an exposed ancient coral reef, its high ground reaching nearly 900 feet above the water it grew out of. That history never really left. Around its edges, the same reef system continues underwater, part of a barrier reef that runs for more than 700 miles along 4 countries, the second longest reef system on Earth. It shows in the color alone. The water shifts from deep navy to pale turquoise in bands, tracing coral formations you can read from the air like a map. Along the coastline, forest gives way in patches to red-roofed buildings and hillside resorts, tucked into coves where the reef breaks the swell before it reaches shore. Some mornings arrive hazy, the coast fading into soft gray light. Other days, the water turns almost impossibly clear, glass over sand. Coxon Hole anchors the island as its commercial center, while West End and West Bay have grown into its most visited shorelines, known for calm water and white sand. Rocky points jut into the sea between the beaches, dark volcanic stone against turquoise shallows. Beneath the surface, more than 65 species of coral and over 500 species of fish keep this reef alive. Roatán is still, in every sense, standing on the reef that made it. Bonaire doesn't announce itself the way most Caribbean islands do. No towering peaks, no jungle, just a low, dry outline 80 kilometers off Venezuela, sitting outside the hurricane belt that batters its neighbors. Kralendijk, the capital, hugs the western shore in a tight strip of pastel rooftops and quiet marinas, boats swinging on their anchors in water almost too clear to register as an obstruction. Step off nearly any stretch of coast and you're already in the marine park, one of the first ever established, drawn around the whole island down to 200 feet, with 86 dive sites reachable straight from the sand. Below the surface, the reef keeps its own order, sponges in violet and gold, coral built up in slow layers, sheltering more than 350 fish species in water that hides almost nothing. A short crossing away, Klein Bonaire sits uninhabited, 6 square kilometers of scrub and white sand with no roads and no reason to change. South of town, the landscape turns industrial without losing its strangeness. Salt has been raked from these flats since the 1600s, when the Dutch West India Company first put the trade winds to work. Rows of pastel slave huts from 1850 still line the shore, small enough to duck into, built to house the people who once worked these pans by hand. Today, Cargill runs the operation, and the ponds still evaporate into mountains of salt 50 feet high, each holding 10,000 tons at nearly total purity. Right beside all that industry, the Pekelmeer stands as one of just 4 places on Earth where flamingos choose to breed, drawn in by the same brine that feeds the salt trade. Further along the coast, a squat red and white tower has marked the water since 1838, the Willemstoren Lighthouse, named for a king who never set foot here. Ships once loaded salt straight from a pier jutting into the blue, the same trade that built this island's economy long before diving ever did. Bonaire runs on that same quiet contradiction everywhere, a reef too pristine to touch, next to salt flats that never stopped working. Barely bigger than a small town, this island belongs to 2 countries at once. French on one side, Dutch on the other, split not by war, but by a handshake treaty signed in 1648, one of the oldest borders still standing anywhere in the world. From the ramparts of Fort Lewis, the line is invisible, only the view keeps changing. Built in 1789 to guard Marigo's harbor, the fort once watched for pirates coming to raid its stores of rum, salt, and sugarcane. Now it just watches the light move across the bay. Below, Marigo's name means swamp, a fishing village that grew into a capital without ever losing its color. Boats crowd the water where warehouses once stood, and the hills behind it stay green all year. Follow the coast east, and the land opens into something wider, white sand curving for over a mile along Orient Bay, the hills rolling down almost to the waterline. Inland, Simpson Bay Lagoon spreads out like a second sea, one of the largest of its kind in the West Indies, with the border running straight through its calm water. Closer to Phillipsburg, the reef beneath the surface breaks the current into ribbons of turquoise and pale green. Out past the point, Anguilla sits low on the horizon, close enough to feel like part of the same story. Two nations, one small piece of land, and from up here, it barely looks divided at all. The forest reaches Tobago's coast before the beaches do. Down the island's spine runs the Main Ridge Forest Reserve, protected since 1776 and recognized as the oldest legally protected forest reserve in the Western Hemisphere. From above, it's one unbroken canopy, a single road cutting along the ridge with the sea flashing through gaps in the trees. Deep inside that green, Argyle Waterfall drops 175 feet over 3 tiers, the tallest fall on the island. The water stays cold even in the heat, dropping through rock the forest has closed in around for 2.5 centuries. Then the hills open, and the color changes completely. Rivers slide out toward mangroves and quiet coves, boats resting at anchor just off the sand. Off the southwestern coast lies Buku Reef, roughly 7 square kilometers of coral flats wrapped around a shallow lagoon. Near its edge sits the Nylon Pool, a sandbar Princess Margaret named in 1962 for water so clear it reminded her of nylon stockings. Wooden jetties reach out into that same turquoise, built for boats that never have far to go. On the south coast, Scarborough climbs the hill above the harbor, Tobago's capital, and the port where the ferry to Trinidad still comes in. Back on land, the island runs on doubles, curried chickpeas folded between 2 pieces of fried flatbread, sold wrapped in paper at stands the length of both islands. Water this clear doesn't happen everywhere. Bequia sits in the southern Grenadines, part of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, just 15 kilometers from the capital, Kingstown, across open sea. At only 7 square miles, it's one of the smallest inhabited islands in the chain, yet its harbor carries an outsized reputation. Admiralty Bay curls into the west coast, deep and sheltered enough that sailors once called it the safest natural anchorage in the eastern Caribbean through hurricane season. That's why the masts never really thin out here. Above the bay, Port Elizabeth climbs the hillside in white walls and red rooftops, named for a princess in 1937, long before anyone imagined what the harbor below would become. The reef beneath the boats isn't decoration. It's what turns the water those layered shades of turquoise and navy. Move along the coast, and the island changes register. quiet coves, a scatter of houses tucked into green hillside, then a curve of pale sand meeting the sea. Bequia's story was built on wood and water, cedar-hulled schooners once repaired here, in a harbor with no equal for hundreds of miles. One of those vessels, the Friendship Rose, still sails today, the last of its kind still working the islands. Small stone chapels and shopfronts hold their ground along the shore roads, unhurried, unchanged by the traffic passing through the bay. Bequia never had to grow to matter. It just had to keep this harbor exactly the way it's always been. And that's the real Caribbean, way more than just pirates and movie. From its crystal-clear waters to its vibrant culture, this place truly has a soul of its own. Whether you're a history buff, a beach lover, or an adventure seeker, there's something here for everyone. So, which island would you visit first? Head to Exuma to see the swimming pigs, or to Puerto Rico to marvel at the glowing bays. Let me know in the comments below. Wishing on the next one.